I'm Kaitlin Yarnall, and I'm an executive editor here at National Geographic Magazine, and I'm the director of our Future of Food initiative. I'm delighted to welcome you here today. As you can see, I'm not Declan Moore. Apologies for that. He was unfortunately called to New York, but sends his deepest welcome and thanks for coming here this morning. At National Geographic, we see our editorial coverage as an ongoing dialogue with our audiences. We cover issues such as water, population, climate change. Our stories build on and they complement each other. They offer a deeper context for understanding the challenges we face. So our reporting on food, which has appeared in our print and TV media properties, as well as on natgeofood.com, has been a natural extension of this dialogue. Because feeding our growing planet and our growing world population is perhaps our greatest challenge. The solutions we are exposing are intertwined with how we adapt to climate change and steward resources. Food's one of our major editorial initiatives, which means that we will use the power of the National Geographic brand worldwide to convene conversations like this one. And what we're looking to do is to offer perspective on the complicated issues surrounding food, diet, and the challenge of healthfully feeding 9 billion people by 2050. I can think of no better partner to work with on this initiative than The Ohio State University. They'll be key partners with us in discussing dietary guidelines and nutrition. Please join me in welcoming The Ohio State University and our esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for hyping Ohio State University. That's my sole purpose in life. I am obviously the director of the Food Innovation Center, and I want to just spend 3 minutes on who, what, and why we're here today. First, who. I just want a quick show of hands of the employees and friends of the National Geographic who might be in the room. How about employees and friends of Ohio State University? And I like students because it's not just Ohio State. We have students from other universities as well. Friends and family of students? That's a good number there. How about friends or family, employees and family, or employees and friends of the media? And employee and friends of elected officials and policymakers. They're out making policy, but we have about 5 individuals here from that category. And actually, our most important is our sponsors. We want to thank any of our sponsors that are here or their friends. Abbott Nutrition, Abbott Nutrition Health Institute, of course, the Dannon Institute, and the National Dairy Council. I'm there. Anyone I missed? And of course, I asked for friends, so I assume everyone who has not raised their hand are enemies. And that's fine too. One special friends that I want to point out is Julie Manning and Kaitlin Fritz. Could you just raise your hands? They're in the back. This particular conference is going to go well because of the fine efforts of Julie and Kaitlin, who are employees of the Food Innovation Center, but also really outstanding professionals that you should meet. So they're responsible for everything that goes right. As director of the Food Innovation Center, I'm responsible for everything that goes wrong today, so you can blame me, and that's fine. I said what, and what is the Food Innovation Center at Ohio State, which is actually something I'd like to plug just for a minute. We connect all 15 colleges at the nation's largest and most comprehensive land-grant university. We've funded projects that leverage over $8 million in extramural support over the past 5 years, and it's all collaborative. So we collaborate with medicine, we collaborate across humanities, we collaborate across science, architecture, we have law school members and even attorneys, and of course, food policy, which is what we're all about today. Ohio State has raised $500 million, this would be, to hire 380 new faculty members over the next 10 years, and a good 1/3 of those hires will be in what we call the food discovery arena. We have a brand new president, Michael Drake, who's made a commitment in his investiture speech, which is like inauguration, to the issue of food security. And this is something that you're going to see long-term impact at Ohio State on the food agenda. This is the one place that's going to make a difference, as well as other universities in what we call the science basis for food policy. So it's no surprise that Ohio State faculty members have been on the Dietary Guidelines scientific advisories for the past 2 rounds, the prior and the current. They are individuals who provide great science to advance the food agenda of the nation as well as the world, because our guidelines are used worldwide. Food Innovation is pleased to advance the national conversation in partnership with National Geographic, who was so gracious in making this a national conversation through a year-long editorial series, as well as their commitment to this issue. So the last issue I wanted to take up with you in this short amount of time is why. Why do we want to do this? As this national conversation advances, I seek your help, the people in the room, to determine our next steps. We're streaming the conference live, so there will be a video outcome, but that's not sufficient. Well, we are going to come to a collective understanding of what we do to ensure effective food policy that's based on science. Dr. Achtenberg at our event yesterday suggested we might need another White House conference on food policy and dietary guidelines for America. Another possible outcome is a congressional hearing on this very subject that we're dealing with today. And something we need to rethink the entire process to ensure continuous factual science basis for food policy that actually works. So that's my 3-minute quick introduction here. There's a clock up here. I should just warn our panelists and our speakers, when that thing hits 0, there's an electrical pulse that comes through the stage and is going to shock us all into submission. And so I'm going to just spend 1 minute in introducing our lead-off speaker. We're very important, and I'm pleased that he came right on time. I'm pleased to welcome our USDA Undersecretary for Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services, Kevin Concannon. Undersecretary Concannon has principal responsibility and provides funding for Food Nutrition Services, or FNS, which serves 1 in 4 Americans through SNAP, the National School Lunch Program, WIC, and many critical nutrition programs that ensure millions of Americans have access to healthy food. The Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion is a component of FNS. The center promotes the dietary guidelines for the famous My Plate. We've all seen that very recognizable graphic that gives consumers a tool to build a healthy diet. We invite Undersecretary Concannon to comment today on the 2015 Dietary Guidelines. Please come on up, and a warm welcome.
Pleased to be here. Let me just correct one thing. The Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion is separate from the Food Nutrition Service. It's part of the combined, both of those two mission areas are under my responsibilities, but they are separate. We work closely together, but separately. So, good morning. I'm pleased to be here with all of you today, and especially pleased at your level of interest in the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. As you may be aware, the American public shares your interest. HHS and USDA have received a total of more than 29,000 written public comments on the scientific report of the 2015 Advisory Committee. In comparison, we received 1,200 public comments on the 2010 Advisory Committee, and this compares to 130,000 comments on the school meals changes associated with the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. Comments from the public and our federal agencies are a critical part of the process as we develop the 2015 Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which we plan to release later this year, and we're on schedule to release such. People pay attention to the dietary guidelines because these dietary guidelines are implemented. As we've seen in the headlines, there's been a lot of dialogue about the dietary guidelines. Let me be very clear. Working with our colleagues at HHS, we will adhere to the statutory parameters for the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, focusing on providing food-based recommendations that are grounded in the strongest body of scientific evidence. As we all know, obesity and diet-related preventable health conditions are wreaking havoc on American society, increasing healthcare costs, reducing quality of life and productivity, even threatening national security. We must, as a nation, take firm and proactive steps both to address food insecurity and to prevent obesity and its myriad consequences. As difficult as prevention may seem, it's still much easier than reversing chronic conditions. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans, representing the current body of scientific evidence on healthy eating, is a key, if not the key, instrument in our national prevention toolbox. Unfortunately, dietary intake data reaffirms what we see as we look around us. Far too few Americans are following the guidelines' recommendations, and we're paying a terrible price. This must change if we're to control skyrocketing healthcare costs and other real threats to the nation caused by obesity and diet-related diseases. How can we inspire change and allow the guidelines to live up to their public health potential? At USDA, we're taking a number of steps in this direction. At the most fundamental level, we continue to coordinate with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in joint plans and actions for ensuring that all federal nutrition programs and materials are consistent with the current dietary guidelines. We also help feed 1 in 4 Americans each year with our 15 nutrition assistance programs, and the dietary guidelines ensure these programs support healthier diets. For example, the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. Per the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010, healthy updates to school meals and overall school food environment have been implemented incrementally since 2012. The updates are aligned with the dietary guideline recommendations. While these changes have spurred some negative attention from some lobbyists and some members of Congress and their allies, what's happening with kids in schools across the country is overwhelmingly positive. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation research conducted last year, 6 months after the standards were put in place, showed that 70% of elementary school teachers nationwide reported that students generally like the healthier school lunches. That number is consistent for middle and high schoolers. And anyone who's had teenagers know that's a high approval rating. I didn't quote the stats here. Another study funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation released this year showed that contrary to concerns about food waste, students are throwing away less food since the standards were put in place. Today, 95%, and I stand by this percentage, 95% of schools report they're meeting the standards. Under the law, states are required to set up systems for verifying and certifying that schools are meeting the guidelines. Schools are then subject to administrative reviews. So the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act has strengthened accountability by increasing the frequency of these reviews. And more than 30 million school children are now served healthier meals every day. And nearly 14 million students are having school breakfast each day. The Special Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, WIC as it's known, WIC food packages received a nutrition overhaul in 2008 to align with the dietary guidelines and Institute of Medicine recommendations. As a result, 8 million women, infants, and children receiving supplemental foods through the WIC program are now receiving a wider variety of healthy offerings, including fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. We've also improved the rates of breastfeeding among WIC moms, our top priority for the WIC program. SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We've recently revamped the SNAP-ED program to focus on evidence-based obesity prevention strategies. In addition, we've taken measurable steps in increasing access to farmers markets among the 46 million SNAP participants across the country. Now over 6,200 farmers markets and direct marketing farmers are authorized to accept SNAP benefits, an increase from fewer than 800 such markets back in 2008. We're also working with partners to pilot various healthy incentive programs, healthy eating incentive programs, to encourage healthier choices at various retail points of purchase. We've also developed and tested specific messaging tools to reach consumers where they're making their food decisions. My Plate. Our consumer icon is an actionable, easy-to-remember reminder of the dietary guideline messages. For example, make half your plate fruits and vegetables, and enjoy your food, but eat less. The icon is widely disseminated. We see it in retail marketplaces, classrooms, food banks, has been tailored for targeted audiences, including Me Plateau, My Plate on Campus, as 2 examples. We've also developed the Super Tracker, our personalized online food and activity tracking tool, has over 5.5 million registered users, is now available on mobile devices, with as many as 11,000 new registered users each day. Super Tracker is helping people in real time, over time, and has a fan base. We get great feedback from people who have experienced the positive changes that come with healthier eating, thanks to the Dietary Guidelines. Lest we forget why we're all in this together, here's one typical example of the kind of feedback people send us. Quotes, after decades of being both being able to lose weight and improve my diet with the My Plate team, I've lost 10% of my body weight and have lowered my AIC. This is life-changing and life-saving for me. And social media. Communication research suggests that people respond favorably to information from peers. Hence, we're harnessing the power of social media sites like Twitter, 76,000 followers, not nearly as many as the president, and Facebook, 53,000, to disseminate our messages. This is a small sampling of the work that USDA is doing to promote and implement the Dietary Guidelines. While some try to characterize these actions as the nanny state, we wholeheartedly and vigorously disagree. Our actions are a necessary response to 2 urgent crises we already heard them referenced. The existence of poverty and food insecurity, and the second point, obesity and diet-related chronic diseases. 2 major threats to our nation's economy, national security, and way of life. While we believe that we're taking vital steps, we also realize that a systemic shift across all sectors of our food environment is necessary to reinforce healthy dietary behaviors population-wide. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans is our nation's nutrition beacon and a marker, a guide to us to keep us focused and supporting a strong, healthy nation. Thank you for the important role you play toward our shared goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Concannon, for a very cogent and lucid message that we will all remember. I want to move right along and ask the perhaps rhetorical question: who is the chief architect of the Dietary Guidelines? Many credit Dr. Michael McGinnis for this noteworthy feat. He's an early crusader for policies and programs that support preventative health care. Dr. McGinnis has continuous policy responsibilities for prevention through 4 administrations, the Carter, the Reagan, Bush, and Clinton administrations. He conceived and launched several initiatives of ongoing policy importance, including the Dietary Guidelines for Americans in 1980. He's an elected member of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies and served as an IOM Senior Scholar since 2005. He serves as founding leader for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Health Group and numerous other domestic and international health initiatives. And we are honored to have Dr. McGinnis join us this morning to share his insights on changes in the food environment over the last 35 years. Great to see you, man.
Thank you, Ken. And thanks to all of you for the opportunity to be with you today. I suppose I should offer special thanks to Julie and Kaitlin for their courage in inviting me. You know, when you invite somebody who's been around since the beginning of something, you're at real risk of listening for a very long time. So I'm going to try to adhere to my allotted 15 minutes and speed along, but beware. Special privilege to be here with Secretary Concannon. I do remember very well and was especially reminded by his eloquent review of the activities that are underway under USDA's leadership. I remember very well working with his predecessor, Carol Tucker Foreman, who was the Undersecretary for Food and Nutrition Services at the time that the Dietary Guidelines were conceived. They were conceived actually at a meeting in his office. I'm not sure if it's the same room now, but it was a meeting between Carol Tucker Foreman, Rupert Cutler, who was the head of research at USDA, Mark Hegstead, who was a senior advisor at USDA, and from the HHS side, or then actually it was HEW, Don Fredrickson, who was the head of NIH, Don Kennedy, who was the head of FDA, Julie Richmond, who was the head of the Surgeon General, and myself. And it was actually Don Kennedy, or Don Fredrickson, who suggested that we needed dietary guidelines. His specific suggestion was in response to the McGovern Committee's dietary goals. So there was a subtle semantic proposal that he was offering. That's all the history I'm going to give you, aside from my assignment of 1980 to 2015. I should first ask where the slide, is this it? Okay, good. The green one, thank you very much. Start with, I'm still not quite getting it. Oh, here we go, got it now. Great. Start with the caveats. These are personal perspectives. They're not positions of the Institute of Medicine or the National Academies. And I will make some observations on the 2015 dietary guidelines, but obviously they're personal as well, and they're just projections based on what I've read in the excellent report of the Dietary Guidelines Scientific Advisory Panel. And congratulations to the committee on that count as well. My comments are going to cover three topics, about 5 minutes each: a new environment, the new guidelines, and new responsibilities, 1980 versus 2015. With respect to the food environment, then and now, there are some very positive elements, and you heard Secretary Concannon refer to several of them. The awareness of the dietary guidelines has increased substantially. There's a developed awareness of the importance of physical activity as a key element in a balanced equation. Improvement in the way in which the nutrition labels used to convey information to enhance the applicability of the guidelines. Increase in food access and availability, especially important to those who are threatened with food security challenges. Recent changes in food marketing to children, I mentioned that in particular. I had the privilege of chairing the panel on food marketing to children about 10 years ago now, and there's been substantial change in this last 10 years. Not enough yet, but a substantial change nonetheless in the way in which food is marketed to children in a variety of circumstances. And as Secretary Concannon mentioned, a substantial change in the school nutrition environment. Very impressive, 95% reporting adherence to dietary guidelines. Extremely impressive and important. Been an increase in the consumption of dietary fiber among Americans, decrease in total fat and saturated fat consumption, and a concomitant decline in heart disease and stroke. Very good news on those counts. There is some bad news as well. This is the then and now the minus side of things. Fruit consumption has declined. I should emphasize as well that these are approximations, and the time frames involved vary. If you want the precise sources for the precise years, get in touch with my office. Vegetable consumption is down substantially, actually, at least fresh fruits and vegetables. Added sugars are up about 30%. Sugary drinks up 200% or so. Daily calories are up as well. Child obesity, obviously, up 200%. It's nice to see the stabilizing in the trend now, but nonetheless, that's a dramatic shift over that 35-year period. Adult obesity, same, 200%. Low-income obesity has increased about the same pace, but starting from a higher level, and with the concentration of effects disproportionate in that population. And of course, the really tough consequences that we've seen as a result of some of these changes. Diabetes is the only cause of death in the top 10 causes of death, which has actually increased aside from dementia in the last 2 decades. Heart disease, stroke, and cancer, along with diabetes, still represent nearly a quarter of all early deaths in America from poor diets and sedentary lifestyles. Similarly, in morbidity, not only with the chronic diseases I mentioned, but another chronic disease, osteoarthritis, one only has to look at the costs that we have increasing with hip and knee replacements to see that there's some serious consequences on that front as well. About 3/4 of U.S. medical bills are for diet-related chronic diseases. Obesity itself, $200 to $300 billion in treatment costs in a year. So these are signs that while we've come some way in terms of progress, we have a lot more progress ahead of us. The opportunities are substantial. And let's talk a little bit about the potential impact of this year's dietary guidelines to come on that front. First, let's start with the Dietary Guidelines of 1980, just to remind. Eat a variety of foods, maintain ideal weight, eat foods with adequate starch and fiber, avoid too much fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol, avoid too much sugar, avoid too much sodium, and if you drink alcohol, do so in moderation. There are not a lot of differences in many ways, at least in the broad dimensions involved, and which gives us a hint of the kind of challenges that we have to engage. If you looked at the dietary guidelines in the first 4 iterations, 80, 85, 90, and 95, they're virtually identical in emphases. There are embedded, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, there are embedded subtleties in the extent to which we missed opportunities to emphasize certain dimensions that were inherent in the motivating descriptions of the various guidelines. For example, the obvious importance of emphasizing complex carbohydrates and giving a stronger emphasis on the avoidance of refined sugars as relatively in the grand scheme of things. But again, I'll come back to that in a minute. In 2015, what we can anticipate, and again, this is my rough projection based on the scientific panel's recommendations. Choose a diet higher in vegetables and fruits. Choose whole grains over refined grains. Consider low non-fat dairy, legumes, nuts, and seafood. With respect to nutrients, choosing vegetables and fruits helps lower the intake of saturated fat, added sugars, and sodium, and helps to achieve the needed vitamins A, D, E, C, folate, calcium, magnesium, fiber, and potassium. Choose a diet lower in red and processed meat, sugar-sweetened foods and drinks, refined grains. If you drink alcohol, do so in moderation. Increase physical activity. Mind the totality. Screen time, fast foods, policy and culture enablers, ecosystem dynamics. And that's a very important piece of this from my perspective. In essence, looking back at the motivating circumstances and the differences in play in 1980 and 2015, one gets a sense of the reasons for the emphasis involved. In 1980, the primary focus, some of you will recall, was to shift federal guidance from the notion of nutrient adequacy in the 4 food groups 35 years ago to the focus on excess intakes, dietary patterns, and chronic disease implications as a whole. There was also the aim of harmonizing the messages between health and agriculture, indeed to pull the 2 departments as the principal spokespersons, if you will, into a unified, consistent message, and to provide policy alignment reference points. Even though that intent was present from the outset, aligning policy reference points, it was not immediately the primary focus of the implementation work. Now, in 2015, the principal aims, and I'm using interpretive license here a bit, are a little different. To update and deepen the scientific alignment of the guidance, to strengthen that all-important derivation of the guidance from the science base, to improve the food-oriented utility of the messages. After all, it's not nutrients that we eat individually, it's food choices we make. And I bolded the final point for a reason that I'll mention in just a second, to introduce and underscore the integrative and cultural perspective. It's the system. It's the system. You know, without addressing the issues in the system, in many ways, it's a little like trying to play chess without the board. You have those individual pieces, and you know what the instructions are for those individual pieces, but without a board, without dealing with the environment and the way in which the board shapes the game, it's pandemonium. And that's the challenge moving forward. We have to align in an integrative fashion much better the relationship between the dietary guidelines and the messages. We're working on that pretty well. The programs involved, and we've heard about progress in the school programs, but that's a beginning. Integrative services across the board, integrative commitments. That, and by that I mean not commitments just of government or of parties within government, but the public-private commitment that is genuine, real, and tracked, monitored carefully to ensure that what we say we're going to do, we actually do. And that comes to the issue of integrated policies, which is my last slide, just to show the number of opportunities that we have. Growth and supply of foods, food safety, food pricing, nutrition education, nutrition labels, food marketing, food assistance, nutrition monitoring, nutrition research. All of these activities, public and private, need to align in a much better fashion if we're going to achieve the substantial gains that are possible. A colleague and I did some work about 20 years ago, which is still relevant, on the issue of the actual causes of death. At that time, we noted that tobacco was the #1 actual cause of death in society. Well, now that's not the case. The actual cause of death, leading cause of death in society now, is food and physical activity patterns. If we're going to make the kind of progress that's necessary, that we have the possibility to make, it's going to take the commitment of everybody in this room and all of your friends and colleagues and even your enemies to drag them along in order to make the difference. So I want to end by not only thanking National Geographic, the Ohio State University, the USDA, and HHS, but all of you in advance for the leadership that you'll provide. Thank you very much.